The air in the restaurant felt thick, heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of forced laughter. It coated my tongue, dry and metallic. My dress, a simple black sheath I'd pulled from the back of my closet, felt like a costume. Across the polished mahogany table, he was laughing, a booming, confident sound that used to make my stomach flutter, now just a dull ache behind my eyes. Next to him, she giggled, a sound like wind chimes made of ice. Her hand rested on his arm, her skin impossibly smooth, glowing under the soft light. Younger. He'd called her that. An upgrade. The word had landed like a stone in my gut weeks ago, but the bruise still lingered. I traced the rim of my water glass, the condensation cool beneath my fingertip. I could feel their eyes on me, or rather, I could feel his eyes on me, a smug, proprietary gaze mixed with pity, like watching a rescued stray adjust to the cold outside. And her eyes, fleeting glances, curiosity mixed with a carefully constructed innocence. They were waiting for me to break, to crumble, to look like the discarded thing I was supposed to be. My hands were steady. My smile, though it felt brittle at the edges, held. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about the quiet fire burning low in my own chest. The kind that doesn't consume you, but forges you into something harder. Something they could never have predicted. He leaned forward, his voice dropping just slightly, enough for me to hear, enough, he thought, to make me squirm. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps me more than you know. It started quietly, as these things often do. A slow fade, like colors left too long in the sun. 10 years. A decade woven from shared jokes, late-night talks that blurred into early mornings, the comfortable weight of his hand in mine. We built a life. A small house in the suburbs, a garden I poured my heart into, 2 cats who ignored us with regal disdain. My life was soft edges, worn blankets, the predictable rhythm of Tuesdays and Fridays. I worked from home, a graphic designer for a small marketing firm. He was in real estate, the kind who chased the big deals, the kind whose phone buzzed constantly, even at dinner. I didn't mind. I was proud of his drive. I believed in his dreams, the ones we talked about holding hands on the sofa, the ones that involved tropical beaches and early retirement. My dream was simpler. It was us, just building something quiet and true together. I poured my energy into making our house a home, into cooking meals that smelled like comfort, into being the soft place for him to land after a hard day. I wasn't glamorous. I didn't chase trends. I was me. Comfortable. Predictable. In hindsight, maybe that was the problem. Predictable became boring. Comfortable became stagnant. The little things I cherished, the quiet evenings, the familiar scent of his skin on the pillow next to me, slowly began to feel like shackles to him. I saw the change, felt it like a shift in the air before a storm. The way his eyes lingered on his phone screen, the subtle distance when I reached for him. He'd work late, travel for business trips that stretched an extra day, excuses that sounded plausible but felt hollow. The quiet fire in my chest then was just a pilot light, a tiny flicker of unease I tried to ignore. I told myself it was stress, the pressure of his job. I doubled down on being the perfect wife, the supportive partner, the rock. I made his favorite meals, ironed his shirts just the way he liked them, listened patiently to his endless stories about difficult clients. I was trying to mend something I didn't realize was already shattered. The air in the house grew colder, thinner. He was physically present, but emotionally 1,000 miles away. The laughter was forced, the conversations superficial. We were strangers living in the same house, sharing the same address, but not the same life. I felt a profound loneliness settle over me, a heavy cloak that no amount of effort seemed able to lift. I'd lie in bed at night, listening to his even breathing, feeling the vast, silent space between us. It wasn't a dramatic fight that finally broke it. It was the absence of everything. The absence of touch, of shared thoughts, of connection. Just a growing, aching void where love used to be. And then, the polite, clinical conversation that sealed my fate. He sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd signed the papers for the house, where we'd shared countless meals. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. His voice was calm, measured, utterly detached. He used words like growing apart, different paths. My needs have changed, he avoided my eyes. He said he'd found someone else. Someone who understood his ambition, his drive. Someone who was, he actually said this, more aligned with where I am now. I remember the blood draining from my face, the room spinning slightly. The silence that followed felt louder than any scream. The cats, oblivious, wound around my legs, purring. The mundane cruelty of that moment, the stark contrast between the life we'd built and the clinical way he was dismantling it, was breathtaking. He spoke of practicality, splitting assets, selling the house. He had it all planned out. He always was good at planning. Except, it turned out, he hadn't planned for everything. He mentioned her name once, a soft, unfamiliar sound on his tongue.
Sarah.
Younger. More aligned. The words echoed in the sudden, vast emptiness of the house after he left. He took a few boxes, his expensive suits, his golf clubs. He left behind a decade of my life scattered like debris. The house felt too big, too quiet. Every corner held a memory, a ghost of a moment we'd shared. The garden, once my sanctuary, now felt like a cruel reminder of the future I'd planned, the roots I'd put down, only for them to be ripped out. The silence was oppressive. I stopped answering calls, stopped opening curtains. The world outside felt alien and hostile. I existed in a blur of grief and disbelief. The betrayal cut deeper than just him leaving. It was the casual dismissal of everything we were, everything I was. The idea that I could be so easily replaced, so easily deemed not enough, not aligned with his shiny new trajectory. The younger model. The phrase haunted me. It wasn't just about age, it was about value. He was trading me in for a newer, shinier version, one he perceived as having more features, more worth. My worth, it seemed, had depreciated. This feeling, this cold, hard knot of being discarded, became the fuel. Not anger, not sadness initially, just a profound, aching worthlessness. I stopped eating. Sleep was fractured by nightmares. The house became dusty, neglected. The plants in the garden started to wilt. I felt like I was wilting too. I would sit for hours on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the wall, the silence punctuated only by the ticking clock, a relentless march forward I didn't want to follow. Friends called, but I couldn't find the words. My boss was patient, but I could feel the pressure mounting. I was drowning in the wreckage of my life. The emails from his lawyer started arriving. Cold, impersonal documents detailing the division of our lives. Each clause felt like a fresh wound. He wanted the house sold. He wanted the cats. He wanted half of everything. He wanted to erase me cleanly, efficiently. He had moved into an apartment downtown, closer to her, closer to his new life. Friends, mutual friends, started choosing sides. Some awkwardly avoided me. Some offered platitudes that felt like sawdust in my mouth. A few tried to bridge the gap, suggesting we could all still be friends, a suggestion so absurd it made me want to laugh or scream. I heard things through the grapevine. He was happy. He was thriving. He was introducing her as the one. The whispers carried snippets of his new life, a life he seemed eager to parade. He was bragging about his success, about his freedom, about her. He was telling people he'd upgraded, that he finally had someone who could keep up with him, someone who wasn't holding him back. The words, reported back to me with hesitant sympathy by a friend who still dared to call, felt like blows. Holding him back. I'd spent a decade supporting him, sacrificing my own career ambitions to create a stable home, to be his anchor. The quiet fire that had been a pilot light flickered, then surged. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was indignation. It was a primal scream trapped behind clenched teeth. Holding him back.
No.
He had been holding me back. Holding me in a small, comfortable box that he had now discarded. And he was bragging about it. Treating my life, my worth, as collateral damage in his ascent. The financial realities began to bite. My freelance work had dried up. I was living off savings, watching the numbers shrink with terrifying speed. The lawyer's fees piled up. Selling the house would mean dismantling the last physical vestige of the life I'd built, but it was necessary. It felt like another layer of skin being peeled away. I walked through the rooms, cataloging possessions, deciding what was mine, what was his, what was
Ours.
the ours was the hardest part. The photographs on the walls, the books on the shelves, the worn armchair where we used to read together. Each item was a tiny, sharp shard of memory. Packing boxes felt like burying a body. I was meticulously folding away chapters of my past, sealing them shut. The physical labor was exhausting, but it was the emotional weight that truly crushed me. There were days I couldn't get out of bed. Days I stared at the ceiling, the sheer impossibility of starting over paralyzing me. He was moving forward, effortlessly it seemed, into a life of perceived happiness and success, built partly on the foundation I had helped lay, while I was left sifting through the rubble. The thought of his smug face, the triumphant look in his eyes as he bragged about his upgrade, fueled a slow-burning rage. It wasn't just that he'd left, it was the lack of respect, the utter disregard for my feelings, the public humiliation. He didn't just want to leave. He wanted to rewrite our history, to paint me as the burden, the reason he wasn't reaching his full potential. This narrative, this false version of events, began to circulate amongst the people we knew. It wasn't enough for him to be happy. He needed everyone to believe he was justified, that he'd made the right, the necessary choice. The sting of this public perception, the quiet whispers, the sympathetic glances that felt like judgment, was almost unbearable. I felt exposed, vulnerable, my private pain turned into gossip fodder. I started avoiding places I used to go, afraid of running into someone who had heard his version, afraid of seeing their pitying eyes. I felt like a character in his victory lap, a footnote in his triumphant narrative. And the younger model, Sarah, her presence loomed large. Not because I hated her, I didn't know her, but because she was the symbol of his perceived gain, the living embodiment of my loss, the validation of his narrative that I was old news, obsolete. The pressure mounted. Bills arrived. The lawyer called asking for decisions. The house felt colder, emptier with each box I packed. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by stacks of cardboard, dust motes dancing in the weak sunlight, and felt utterly defeated. This was it, I thought. This is how it ends. Alone, broke, and publicly humiliated. The weight of it all pressed down on me, crushing the last flicker of hope. I sank to the floor, the rough carpet scratching my knees, and let the tears finally come. They weren't tears of sadness anymore, but of exhaustion, of a deep, bone-weary hopelessness. The silence of the house absorbed my cries. There was no one here to comfort me, no one to tell me it would be okay. It felt like the end of my world. But the strange thing about hitting rock bottom is that there's nowhere left to fall. You just sort of stop. And then very slowly you start to notice the ground beneath you. The rough texture of the carpet. The faint scent of dust. The single persistent weed pushing through a crack in the patio outside the sliding glass door. Something shifts. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, not a blinding flash of inspiration. It was more like a slow warming from the inside out. The rage I had suppressed, the indignation, the humiliation, it hadn't disappeared. It had just been simmering, waiting for the moment when the hopelessness receded. As I sat there on the floor, the tears eventually stopped. The silence remained, but it no longer felt oppressive. It felt quiet. A blank slate. I looked at the boxes, at the half-packed life scattered around me. And for the first time, I didn't see wreckage. I saw pieces. Pieces I could rearrange. Pieces I could use to build something new. The image of his smug face, the words "upgraded to a younger model," flashed in my mind. And something inside me clicked. He saw me as obsolete, as less than. He had publicly, casually discarded me. And he was bragging about it. He thought he had won. He thought he had moved on to something better, leaving me behind in the dust. And I realized, in that quiet moment on the floor, that I had accepted that narrative for too long. I had allowed myself to be defined by his leaving, by his perceived superiority. But his perception wasn't my reality. My reality was that I was still here, still standing, albeit wobbly, still breathing. And I had a choice. I could continue to drown in the past he had abandoned, or I could use the anger, the humiliation, the sheer injustice of it all, as fuel. Not for revenge in the petty sense, not for screaming matches or public scenes, but for something colder, sharper. Something that would dismantle his narrative. He wanted everyone to see him as the winner, the one who had moved on to bigger and better things. What if I moved on to something bigger and better in a way he could never have anticipated? A quiet, potent idea began to form. It wasn't about getting him back. It wasn't even really about Sarah. It was about reclaiming my own story, my own worth, in a way that directly contradicted his carefully constructed image of me. He saw me as quiet, predictable, easily discarded. What if I was none of those things? What if the woman he thought he knew, the woman he had left, was just a part of me, a smaller version, and the fire he had ignited with his callousness had forged something entirely new? The idea was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. It meant stepping outside of my comfort zone, embracing uncertainty, and confronting the very insecurities his leaving had amplified. It meant using the skills he had dismissed, my eye for detail, my quiet persistence, my ability to see patterns others missed, not for his benefit anymore, but for mine. The quiet fire in my chest wasn't just burning now. It was spreading, warming me from the inside out, pushing back the cold darkness that had enveloped me. I stood up, my legs stiff, the ache in my joints a dull reminder of how long I'd been sitting there. I looked at the boxes again, but this time I didn't see endings. I saw beginnings. A blank canvas, albeit one covered in dust.
He thought he had won.
He thought he had written the final chapter. He had no idea I was just sharpening my pen. The plan began to take shape slowly, tentatively at first, like the first delicate leaves unfurling in spring. It wasn't a linear path, but a series of small, determined steps. The first step was practical. I needed money. The house sale was inevitable, but it would take time. I had to get back to work. The thought of facing my colleagues, of explaining what had happened, was daunting. But the image of his bragging, the casual dismissal of my value, was a potent motivator. I emailed my boss, a simple, professional note explaining that I was ready to resume my freelance work. The response was sympathetic and understanding.
They had been waiting for me, they said.
My skills were needed. It was a small validation, a tiny crack of light in the darkness. Getting back into the routine was hard. My concentration was shot. The quiet house echoed with distractions. But I forced myself to sit at my desk, to focus on the design briefs, the color palettes, the layouts. It felt mechanical at first, like my hands knew what to do even if my mind was miles away. Slowly, the rhythm returned. And as I worked, a strange thing happened. I found a sense of purpose again. Creating something, anything, felt like pushing back against the void. Each completed project was a small victory, proof that I wasn't broken, that I was still capable. The money I earned was more than just income, it was independence. It meant I wasn't reliant on the settlement from the house, on his money. It meant I could build my own future, brick by painful brick. The second step was physical. The stress, the grief, the endless nights of worrying had taken a toll. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, pale, drawn, with dark circles under my eyes. I looked like the discarded woman he saw. And I couldn't stand it. I started small. Walks around the block. Gentle stretching. Then, tentatively, I joined a local yoga class. The first few sessions were agony. My body was stiff, my mind a whirlwind of anxious thoughts. But the focus required, the slow, deliberate movements, the emphasis on breath, began to quiet the noise in my head. The physical strength I slowly regained mirrored a growing inner resilience. I started eating properly again. Cooking for myself, simple, nourishing meals. The kitchen, once a place of shared comfort, slowly became my own space, a place of creation and self-care. The third step was strategic. This was where the quiet plan began to intertwine with my professional life. My work involved design, branding, understanding how to present something or someone in the best possible light. I knew his world. I knew the kind of people he admired, the circles he moved in. They valued success, appearances, and a certain kind of effortless polish. His new life with Sarah seemed built on this: the chic apartment, the trendy restaurants, the carefully curated social media posts. He was building a brand, a narrative of his own success and happiness. And I realized I could do the same. But my brand wouldn't be a performance. It would be rooted in something real, something he couldn't replicate or dismiss. It wasn't about being younger or trendier. It was about being confident, capable, and undeniably valuable. I started paying attention to things I had previously overlooked. My own appearance, not to impress him, but to feel strong and capable. I bought a few new pieces of clothing, things that felt sharp and modern. I got a haircut that made me feel lighter. Small things, but they felt like shedding the old skin. I also started networking, reaching out to contacts I'd let lapse. I attended industry events, forcing myself to make conversation, to be seen. It was uncomfortable, terrifying at times. The fear of running into someone, of having to navigate the awkward conversations, was always present. But each time I pushed through the fear, I felt a little stronger. The more I put myself out there, the less power his narrative held over me. I was creating my own story, one that wasn't defined by his absence, but by my own presence. And as I rebuilt my professional life, as I regained my confidence, I started to see opportunities one hadn't seen before. Projects that stretched my skills, collaborations that introduced me to new people, new ideas. I was no longer just a graphic designer. I was a creative professional, building a reputation, forging my own path. The idea, the quiet, potent idea that had started on the floor of my empty living room, began to solidify. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. And about doing it in a way that would make his upgrade look less like a triumph and more like a miscalculation. The pieces were falling into place, slowly, deliberately. He was still out there, living his life, oblivious. Still bragging, I assumed. Still convinced he was miles ahead. He had no idea I was watching, learning, building something that would eventually intersect with his world in a way he could never have prepared for. The rising challenges weren't just external anymore. They were internal. The constant battle against doubt, against the lingering pain, against the urge to retreat back into the safety of invisibility. Every step forward felt like pushing against a strong current. There were days when the old despair would threaten to pull me under. A song on the radio, a familiar street corner, a comment from an acquaintance, small triggers that could send me spiraling back to the raw pain of betrayal. I learned to manage these moments, to acknowledge the pain, but not let it consume me. I started journaling, pouring out the tangled mess of emotions onto the page. It was messy and raw, but it helped to untangle the knots in my head. I talked to a therapist, someone outside of my circle, who could offer perspective and tools to navigate the emotional landscape. She helped me see that his actions were a reflection of him, not of my worth. It was a simple truth, but a powerful one. The professional challenges were real too. Competition was fierce. Securing new clients was a constant hustle. There were rejections, setbacks, moments of deep frustration. But each challenge felt like a test, a chance to prove to myself that I was capable, resilient. The idea that he might be watching, might hear about my struggles, fueled a quiet determination. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me fail. I pushed myself harder, took on projects that scared me, learned new skills. I was transforming, not just my external circumstances, but my internal landscape. The woman who had sat weeping on the floor was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone stronger, more focused, more fiercely independent. The house finally sold. It was a bittersweet relief. Packing the last boxes, handing over the keys, felt like closing a door on a significant chapter. It was painful, but also freeing. I found a small apartment downtown in a neighborhood I'd always liked but could never afford before. It was bright, modern, and entirely mine. No shared memories, no ghosts of the past. It felt like a fresh start, a tangible symbol of my newfound independence. Moving in, unpacking boxes that contained only my things, felt profoundly liberating. I decorated it simply, intentionally, creating a space that felt calm and inspiring. It was a small apartment compared to the house, but it felt vast with possibility. I was building my own life, on my own terms, without compromise, without seeking anyone's approval. Meanwhile, his life continued to be a subject of casual conversation among mutual acquaintances. He was still with Sarah. They were apparently the golden couple, attending events, traveling. His career was flourishing. The narrative of his triumphant escape from a stifling marriage seemed firmly entrenched. He seemed genuinely happy, genuinely convinced he had made the right choice. And that was key. He was comfortable in his narrative. He wasn't looking back. He wasn't expecting me to be anything more than the quiet, predictable woman he had left behind, picking up the pieces of a life that, in his eyes, was no longer aligned with his own. This complacency was his blind spot. He underestimated me. He assumed I would fold, that I would fade into obscurity. He never considered that the quiet woman he knew had a depth, a resilience, and a strategic mind he had never bothered to see. The opportunity, the kind that felt too good to be true, arrived unexpectedly. A major international skincare brand was looking for a new face for their global campaign. They wanted someone relatable, authentic, not a supermodel, but someone real, someone whose story resonated. My name came up through a contact I had made at one of the networking events. They had seen my work, my portfolio, and were intrigued by my personal story, the resilience, the reinvention. It felt surreal.
Me?
The face of a global campaign? I was a graphic designer from the suburbs who had just gone through a messy divorce. But they weren't looking for perfection. They were looking for connection. The interview process was intense. Meetings in sleek boardrooms, endless questions about my life, my struggles, my philosophy on beauty and aging, a topic that felt particularly loaded given the younger model comment.
I was honest.
I talked about the pain of betrayal, the struggle to rebuild, the slow process of reclaiming my self-worth. I didn't hide the fact that I had been broken. But I also talked about the strength I had found in the breaking, the clarity that emerged from the chaos. I didn't name names, didn't wallow in bitterness. I focused on the journey, the transformation. It wasn't just about skincare, it was about self-care, about finding beauty and strength from within, regardless of age or circumstance. The campaign concept resonated with me deeply. It was about embracing imperfections, about the beauty of authenticity, about the stories etched into a face. It was the antithesis of the narrative he was living, the one based on superficiality and perceived perfection. I poured my heart into the pitch. I talked about my garden, about the quiet moments of finding peace, about the fierce determination that had grown from the ashes of my old life. I showed them the woman I had become, not the woman he had left. And they saw it. They didn't just see a potential model, they saw a story. A story that was real, relatable, and potentially incredibly powerful. Waiting to hear back was agonizing. Every phone call made my heart leap. Every email notification felt like a potential turning point. I tried to keep working, to focus on my other projects, but the possibility loomed large, a dazzling, almost unbelievable prospect. It wasn't just a job, it was a chance to reclaim my narrative on a massive scale. It was a chance to take the very thing he had used to dismiss me, my age, my perceived lack of glamour, and turn it into a source of strength, a symbol of resilience. It was the ultimate refutation of his younger model narrative. The call came on a Tuesday. I was at my desk, sketching out a logo concept, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. She introduced herself as the head of marketing for the skincare brand. My heart hammered against my ribs. "We loved your story," she said. "We loved your authenticity. We want you." I remember the room spinning slightly, the world outside the window blurring. "Are you serious?" I managed to whisper. "Absolutely," she said. We think you're perfect. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling.
Perfect. Me.
The woman who had been deemed obsolete, not aligned, replaced by a younger model. They thought I was perfect. The silence in my apartment was deafening. Then a slow, quiet wave of emotion washed over me. Not just relief, but something deeper. Vindication. Not the petty, I told you so kind, but a profound, soul-deep validation. My worth wasn't tied to his perception. It never had been.
He just couldn't see it.
And now the world would. The contract was negotiated, the details finalized. The campaign was massive: billboards, magazine ads, television commercials, social media. It would launch globally in 3 months. 3 months to prepare, to wrap my head around the seismic shift in my life. I kept it quiet. Only my closest friends knew, and my family. I didn't want the news to leak, didn't want any drama before the launch. This wasn't about him, not directly. Not yet. It was about me stepping into my own power. The photo shoots were a whirlwind. Early mornings, makeup artists, stylists, photographers. It was a world away from my quiet life as a graphic designer. But I felt strangely at home. The camera didn't feel invasive. It felt like an opportunity to share my story, to connect with others who might be going through their own struggles, their own moments of being underestimated. The campaign concept focused on natural beauty, on the lines that tell a story, on the strength that comes from experience. The tagline was simple: beautifully lived. It resonated deeply with me. My face, with its imperfections, with the faint lines etched around my eyes and mouth, told a story. A story of love and loss, of pain and resilience, of falling down and getting back up. This wasn't about erasing the past. It was about embracing it, about recognizing the beauty in the struggle. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had left me for a younger model, a symbol of perceived youthful perfection. And here I was, representing a campaign that celebrated the beauty of a life lived, the kind of beauty that only comes with time and experience. The universe, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. As the launch date approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. My face would be everywhere. The anonymity I had retreated into after the divorce would be gone. But the fear was tempered by a quiet confidence. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't the discarded wife, the woman who had been replaced. I was the face of beautifully lived. The launch event was held in a stunning venue overlooking the city skyline. It was packed with media, industry insiders, influencers. My friends were there, their faces beaming with pride. I wore a dress that made me feel confident, beautiful, strong. It wasn't about being trendy or trying to look younger. It was about feeling comfortable and powerful in my own skin. I gave a short speech, sharing a snippet of my story, the unexpected turns, the challenges, the journey to self-acceptance. I spoke about finding strength in vulnerability, about the beauty that comes from living fully, authentically. I saw tears in the eyes of some people in the audience. My story resonated. He was there.
Of course he was.
He moved in these circles. I had seen his name on the guest list. He was with Sarah. They arrived late, making a grand entrance, as he liked to do. He looked confident, his arm around her waist, flashing that familiar, arrogant smile. He hadn't seen me yet. The room was crowded, and I was on a raised platform near the back, talking to a group of journalists. I watched him from a distance, a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. A flicker of the old pain, a surge of the quiet satisfaction, a profound sense of detachment. He was just a man now, a character from a past life. He wasn't the center of my world anymore. He wasn't even a planet. He was just a distant star. He and Sarah mingled, working the room. I could see him talking to people, laughing, no doubt holding forth on his latest deal, his latest triumph. He seemed completely oblivious to my presence, to the significance of the event I was the focal point of. His narrative was so powerful to him, so all-consuming, that he couldn't see beyond it. The moment arrived for the unveiling of the campaign. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. A short video played, showcasing the concept, the diverse faces of the campaign, culminating in the main image, the hero shot. My shot. As the screen lit up, filling the space with my face, large and clear, showcasing the beautifully lived tagline, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Then, applause. Loud, sustained, genuine applause. I felt a lump form in my throat. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every woman who had ever felt invisible, discarded, or underestimated. It was about reclaiming our stories. I scanned the room, my eyes searching through the applause, the flashes of cameras. And then I saw him. He was standing near the front, his back to the screen initially. As the applause erupted, he turned, that confident smile still on his face, ready to see what all the fuss was about. His eyes landed on the screen. On my face. Large as life. The smile froze. Vanished. His eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in something I couldn't quite read. Sarah, next to him, looked confused, following his gaze to the screen, then back to him. And then I saw it. The color draining from his face. His jaw going slack. He swayed slightly. He put a hand out, gripping Sarah's arm, then the back of a chair. He looked like someone had just physically struck him. The sound of the applause seemed to intensify, a roaring in my ears. The beautifully lived tagline seemed to hang in the air, specifically for him. He stumbled back, bumping into someone. Sarah was trying to hold him upright, her eyes wide with alarm. He wasn't just surprised. He was blindsided, demolished. He had come to this event, part of his world, expecting to glide through, perhaps see me in a corner looking small and defeated, a confirmation of his choices. Instead, he saw my face, strong and confident, on a global campaign celebrating the very thing he had dismissed. The younger model? He had traded a life for a superficiality, and the world was now celebrating the depth he had discarded. He looked like he couldn't breathe. His eyes were fixed on the screen, then darting frantically around the room, as if looking for an escape. He saw me then, standing on the platform, watching him. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just met his gaze, a quiet acknowledgement. He had bragged about his upgrade, about leaving me behind for someone younger, more aligned. And in that moment, the universe delivered its punchline. His carefully constructed narrative of triumph collapsed around him, exposed as brittle and shallow. He wasn't just seeing my face on a billboard. He was seeing the tangible, undeniable proof that he had made a monumental, humiliating mistake. The sound of his collapse wasn't just physical, it was the sound of his world imploding. He didn't stay long after that. I heard later that he and Sarah left abruptly. There were whispers, curious glances in their direction as they hurried out. His confident strut was gone, replaced by a hasty, almost desperate exit. The rest of the evening was a blur of congratulations, interviews, and flashing lights. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. My phone buzzed nonstop. My face was suddenly everywhere, on news sites, social media feeds. The story wasn't just about a skincare campaign. It was about resilience, about reinvention, about a woman reclaiming her power. And yes, inevitably, the connection to my ex-husband surfaced. It became a part of the narrative, though not the defining part. The focus remained on the message. Beautifully lived for weeks, months even, I saw my face in unexpected places. On buses, in magazines, on websites. Each time, a small jolt, a reminder of how far I had come. The campaign was a massive success. Sales soared. The message resonated with millions of people around the world. My life changed in ways I could never have imagined. Opportunities poured in, speaking engagements, collaborations, offers for book deals. My career as a graphic designer took a back seat to this new path, one I was still figuring out, one that felt both exciting and overwhelming. I never spoke to him directly after that night. We communicated only through lawyers, finalizing the last details of the divorce. The financial settlement, once a source of crushing anxiety, now felt like a minor detail. I didn't need his money. I had built my own success, a success far greater than anything he could have provided or taken away. I heard things, of course. through the same grapevine that had carried the news of his bragging. Sarah eventually left him. Apparently, the man she thought she was getting, the confident, successful go-getter, wasn't quite the same after that night. The public humiliation, the quiet failure exposed at the height of his perceived triumph, seemed to have chipped away at his carefully constructed facade. His confidence, his greatest asset, was shaken. His real estate deals became less frequent, less successful. The market was tough, people said. But I suspected it was more than that. He had been running on pure arrogance, on the belief that he was unstoppable. And seeing me, the woman he had discarded, rise higher than he could have ever imagined, seemed to have deflated him. The younger model narrative had backfired spectacularly. He hadn't upgraded. He had traded authenticity and depth for a fleeting, superficial shine. And the world had chosen the former. My life isn't a fairy tale ending. There are still challenges, still moments of doubt. Success brings its own pressures, its own complexities. But the fundamental shift has happened. I am no longer defined by his leaving. I am defined by my own resilience, my own strength, my own story. The scar tissue is still there, the faint outline of where I was broken. But it's a reminder not of weakness, but of the strength it took to heal, to rebuild, to become beautifully lived. The quiet fire in my chest still burns, but it's not fueled by anger anymore. It's fueled by purpose, by a quiet confidence, by the knowledge that I am more capable, more resilient, more beautiful than I ever knew. He thought he was the architect of my downfall. He was just the match that lit the fire. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.